Hey, John here, and I just want to talk about early westward expansion, how it really happened. And by early westward expansion, what we're talking about is the time of Daniel Boone and so forth, basically that first settlement of the Appalachians going away from the coast. And I'm going to give you 8 key points which I learned from this book, Into the Wilderness by Katharin Brown and Nancy Sorrells. And now this book was really a big eye-opening for me, and I actually bought it at this museum. Now, these key points that I'm going to say, I guess maybe it might not be, these might be obvious to some historians or something, but I think these are a lot of points that I bet most people don't really know about this early settlement. Now, I had to actually get this book, and here's a little better view of what it looks like. And I actually got it at this museum. It was a regional Wilderness Road Museum in Newbern, Virginia. That's the Regional Wilderness Road Museum in Newbern, Virginia. And what it is actually just to show you on a map where that is. So here's Newbern here. Here's the Wilderness Museum here, and it's actually it's on the old Wilderness Road that actually where thousands of people used to pass here on their way going to on the Wilderness Road going to settle into Kentucky. And now this is kind of the path here going to the Cumberland Gap. So forget about that. I think so here's the original Wilderness Road, and I think it went like this way and so forth. And I have to figure that out at some point. But and then I think this was so yeah, it has you going along the interstate here, but actually I think this is like the old road here. But anyway, but it basically this Wilderness Road, it went to the Cumberland Gap here, and then so people went that way. Then they went up here through Lexington. And then if you want to look at another map here, people would come down from Pennsylvania. They go down the Great Valley. They're calling it the Great Valley Road here, but usually it's called the Great Wagon Road. And then starting at Roanoke, it would go part of the Great Wagon Road would go this way, and then the Wilderness Road went this way. Now this Wilderness Road, this is the one that was created by Daniel Boone, and it went through the Cumberland Gap, and this was the main way for people going to Kentucky, which was really like the first like really big area that was being settled, after like the coast and everything was being settled. But anyway, so at this museum I bought this book, and it looks like this is probably about the only place you could buy this book, but actually it's made by this, if you want to go to this company called Lot's Wife Publishing, these are the authors here. So they have this company here, this publishing company that makes these different historical books that area. And I'm not sure, looking on here, that you can actually really just order it directly off the site. So if you're really interested in this book, I would say you'd probably want to call this and find out from them, because it's not on Amazon. But it's a very interesting book. So here's some of the key points that I got from that book. Okay, so animals were the original trailblazers of many important paths of the wilderness. Oh, really? I didn't realize that. So animals, like a lot of these early trails in America were actually started out being made by their natural paths that were made by animals, animal migration, which, and if that's true, obviously there must be lots of other places around the world that also roads that actually were originally started by some animals. So what it says here in this first chapter, where it says early pathways, it says, okay, the frequent salt licks in the region attracted animals of all sizes for centuries, and the wild creatures formed paths as they made their ways to these licks that the Indian tribes later followed, and still later the Europeans. The path to the Great Valley of Virginia began as a trail especially made by herds of buffalo. And that's another interesting thing, that buffalo weren't just out west, they were actually in the Appalachians too. It later became a key portion of what the English called the Warrior's Path. Its Indian name was Athawani. Iroquois word means path of the armed ones. It describes the route that the Iroquois of New York, that linked the Iroquois of New York with the Cherokee villages of Western Carolinas and Tennessee. So yeah, so a lot of these paths, they were natural paths that the animals migrated through, and it would, they trample down the ground, and then the Native Americans, they would use it too, and they probably improved it somewhat, marked it better. Then later, the Europeans came and they would use those same roads, and they made them even wider, and then some of them actually are paved roads now and so forth. So so I guess it's like a buffalo shall lead us, right? So okay, and then early American highways were mostly built by the Indians and then were widened, etc. And that kind of goes along the same thing. So, for instance, the Great Road, it says the Treaty of Lancaster signed that year guaranteed that 1744 that to the Iroquois in return for the cession of their lands that the road south would be expanded and safe passage over it for them. James Patton was directed by this treaty to extend the road. This road was called by various names in the 18th century, including the Great Road, the Great Wagon Road, and the Philadelphia Wagon Road. So that's one example. And then another example, well, it was talking here, let's see, just to sum this up, it was talking about how Daniel Boone, when he built the Wilderness Road, how it was partially, natural roads that were already there from the Indians, and then he did build some new parts of it too. So anyway, and we'll talk a little more about that later on. And okay, the migration. Now the third fact you want to know is this migration was more planned and organized than you might think, and it was mostly by the rich guys. So, so just to look back at the map of that time period. Here's a map from 1750. Okay, and these mountain ranges are kind of simplified, but all this is all the area along here would have been all the real settled by the real nobility and stuff, and gentry from England, and you got even stuff like a lot of these are plantations, and if you look close enough, it's actually interesting. There's actually, you can see, where is it? This is before Washington, D.C. was founded, but you can see that along here, you could actually see, where was it? It was, Washington. Okay, this is Washington. This is before Washington was really famous, but there's his plantation. So these were all like Prince William County, there's places where it's like Lord Halifax, and then it says to the Duke of Halifax and all that. Okay, so anyway, so this is mostly all like rich people down here, like noblemen basically in these areas, and then up here became more like the Scotch-Irish, and they were, people that weren't as wealthy. But the thing about it though is that a lot of these settlements, for the most part, it wasn't them just decide, oh, we're going to go out there on our own. This was actually a concerted effort by some of these rich people living in these lowlands to settle these people out here and to make money off the whole thing, the speculation. So they would get these different grants of land and so forth, and they would settle the people out there and make money off it by settling these people out there. And then, okay, so let me just see here. So the author here says, Americans are fond of the stereotype of the rugged frontierman who battles the wilderness on his own to gain elbow room away from civilization. While there's an element in truth of most stereotypes, the fact remains that it was not the hardy individuals who initiated the conquest of the wilderness, but instead the entrepreneur land speculators. So we can see here's a picture here, for example, Beverly and Bordenland. So this was basically a guy named Beverly and a guy named Borden, and this was somewhere like in the Shenandoah Valley. They got these different grants from the state of, or not the state, but the colony of Virginia to, own. They had the right to sell these lands off, and then what they would do is they would organize and then advertise or whatever they could to like settle people into these areas, and so that happened a lot. And I think we'll see later on that actually there was a very big settlement that was the result of somebody who wanted to settle a bunch of people in Kentucky and make money off of that. But anyway, we'll get back to that part. Now, as far as how the original roads went, Virginia's original traffic course actually created roads for traffic to flow. So they weren't just enforcing traffic; they actually created the traffic. So these judges actually, in a sense, were kind of like foremen and stuff. So just to look at this here, it says in September 1632, the House of Burgesses in Jamestown passed America's first highway legislation. It provided that highways shall be laid in such convenient places that are requested according as the governor or council or commissioners for monthly courts shall appoint according, this is obviously Old English writing or whatever, as parishioners of every parish shall agree. This law required that every man of the colony to provide several days of road labor each year to pay a substitute, a practice dating to medieval England that was in effect in Virginia for 250 years. Okay, then it goes to a little more detail, but it says that basically the responsibility of each segment of the wagon road or the wilderness lay with each county, and it was the judges who would decide, where they were going to build these different roads. And then it says many were in colonial Virginia. Many roads were built in response to popular demand. A group of settlers in a remote portion of the county would petition the county court to have a road built to serve their area. Other courts were initiated by justices of the county seat as a result of perception of a need. And so, Yeah, because it was. They said, okay, the people of Western Virginia were not just subsistence farmers, but it was a complex market economy. So yeah, they realized these judges and so forth, and that they realized that it was important to for this early economy to have the good roads. And then they actually even had roads saying that um, if you build a mill dam, that it needed to be at least 12 feet wide, so the dam could be accommodate a road and a wagon traffic to move grain or flour to and from the mill. So and I think there's other rules too where they said like I guess they had to use like it usually went across like private property. I think it was saying in this book that the that they didn't actually own the land that the roads went on, but they controlled the roads and everything. They I guess it was like a form of like an easement or something. So anyway, so yeah, so from the very beginning they started getting things organized for doing this and building these roads. Okay, and Kentucky was the next fact is Kentucky was born from one man's questionable scheme, and we'll just say it was questionable because it was like whether it was legal or not. I'm not saying whether it wasn't. It was good that it happened, but I'm just saying that it was questionable as legality. Okay, so it says, meanwhile, Judge Richard Henderson of North Carolina conceived an audacious plan to acquire and settle much of present Kentucky in the tradition of earlier investors such as those in the Ohio Company or the Loyal Land Company, but against competing ownership claims from various governments. So basically, it wasn't completely sure that this was actually completely legal what he was doing. And plus, there was like I think at that point there was a time where um, the British government said that you weren't supposed to build it out in that area too. So, but this is just an example of how this happened. It was actually conceived by this rich guy, this Judge Henderson, and some of his buddies to like move a bunch of people out there. It wasn't just a bunch of people who said like, "Hey, let's all move to Kentucky. It sounds like a nice area." It was like like I said before, it's more of an organized thing. And then okay, then he had concluded from one study of characters, laws, and treaties. I mean, obviously he wasn't biased at all, right? When he was he just partially looked at all these laws and studied it, haha, right? And then okay, that the Cherokees were the sole owners of Kentucky, and he could negotiate a sale with a private individual. So they formed the Transylvania Company. I wonder if there's any vampires in there. For the purpose of renting or acquiring land west of the mountains. And then what happened is, okay, Henderson collected the goods in January and February of 1775 and led a great wagon train from North Carolina. He met the Cherokee people at Sycamore Shoals to finalize the purchase of their land in exchange for the goods. So, um, anyway, so yeah, quite a big train there going on. Okay, and then it talks about Daniel Boone. So Daniel Boone, what he was doing is he was working for this Henderson guy. It says once Boone had played his role in the early negotiations, Henderson had another job for him. If this land were to become useful for development and sale, it had to be accessible. The warrior's path alone could not suffice for bringing large numbers of settlers to Kentucky. Boone and Henderson had agreed that the first settlement should be located on the Kentucky River on the northern border boundary of the purchase. This made it necessary for a road to be cut through this area. Anyway, so yeah, so this just shows exactly how it happened. This guy could see the plan. He had, Boone kind of scout the area out ahead of time. He negotiated with the Cherokee for this land, and then he had Boone build a road, and then he obviously advertised to get some people out there and sold them like these different plots of land out there. So anyway, okay, and then another thing you should realize is that for Kentucky, there was only two ways to get there in the late 18th century: one by Pitt or one by the Gap. And so it says here there were only two ways into the wilderness, either in our arduous, okay, sorry, I have a hard time pronouncing stuff today, overland journey to the Ohio River at Fort Pitt, to the Ohio at Fort Pitt, okay, which is actually Pittsburgh, where Pittsburgh is now, and then an even more dangerous journey down a crowded flatboats down the Ohio, or the 826-mile track by foot or horse back to Pennsylvania to the Great Valley. I think we didn't mention too that for the first 20 years of the Wilderness Road, it was actually the book also said it was only accessible by horse. So you could take a wagon down the Great Valley or the Great Wagon Road, but then once you get to the Wilderness Road, then you had to take a horse. So let's see, to the Cumberland Gap in southwestern Virginia. So the latter was far more preferred, but it says that basically it was easier to go through the Cumberland Gap, but if you had a whole bunch of stuff, you might go down the river instead. So just to show you what that would look like. So, um, okay, so this would basically be like, so here's Pittsburgh, and just basically this would be like the Ohio River here, and then you'd float down here, and then you'd end up somewhere here to get to Kentucky. Or you could go like down this way and then go this way and then go across the Cumberland Gap. So, but no matter which way you took to get there, you had to take this way back because there wasn't any way. They didn't have motorboats yet, so there wasn't going to really be any way to like get up here too easily. So but anyway, so that was like, so yeah, that was like the two gateways like during that time. Either Pittsburgh through the Ohio or the Cumberland Gap were the only two ways to get into Kentucky back then. So kind of interesting. And then just to go back to this, then okay, and then the other thing is trail traffic, which went both ways. Which okay, obviously it did. I mean, I guess nobody probably think that you could only go one way on a trail, but maybe you mostly thought about the trails just being some way to go out to the west when out in the wilderness when it was far from the truth. It said it is a mistake to imagine that the traffic was mainly hunters and settlers moving west, for it was dynamic two-way traffic with commercial as well as migratory implications. Okay, and then they mentioned um, the Native Americans. After the signing of the Treaty of Lancaster in 1744, the Iroquois ceded their right to the warrior path to the Virginians and were seen less often using the road, but they still were on the road. Um, and then long hunters, so that was both Europeans and Native Americans who go out for a long time and go like hunting beaver, fur, something like that, and then come back. Daniel Boone would do that kind of thing. And then you had like livestock coming down there. You see the guy there driving livestock and stuff like that, and then that sort of thing. And then okay, and then back then you could build your own town. Well, basically what I'm talking about is this is just the town of Newbern. The way that it was founded is pretty interesting, and I think it kind of like maybe typifies the way maybe some other towns were built. At least gives you an example, because I always kind of wonder sometimes like how did these towns get built and just some random people start putting here. Well, basically what happened here is he built his home here, and which actually that's the one that became the museum, I think. It's on the Wilderness Road, and then he bought this. The guy's name was it's kind of cut off on the screen here, but the guy's name was oops. Okay, the guy's name was Hans. Okay, I hate to say, but I'm kind of, do I have his name here? Oh, Adam Hans. Okay. So the Plat of Newbern. So what he did, then he came up with all these plots here, and they sold them to people. But as part of the agreement, he had all kinds of strict things about like, okay, it has to be how thick the walls had to be and what the roof had to look like. So basically, he wanted to make sure like it wasn't, this could be some crappy looking town. So he wanted to make sure like it looked pretty nice. And I guess that would also attract more people to come if it looked nice. So anyway, so it shows that they also had a lot of standards back then too. They didn't just like, you couldn't just put up any shack. Well, at least in his town you couldn't. Maybe in other places you could. So anyway, okay, I guess that's the end of the slideshow. Yeah. So anyway, that was a really interesting book to me. It really explained a lot to me about exactly how this whole wilderness settlement happened. I just had a vague idea, and it was this museum is really nice too. This museum in Newbern. So if you ever get a chance to go there, and if you're interested in buying this book, yeah, it looks like you'd probably have to like maybe call one of go to this website and then call one of these numbers and see if there's a way of ordering it. Because they had an order form on it, but it listed like some of these other books. It didn't list that book. So anyway, yeah. So it's just like it's kind of like a small town like publishing company, but it's but that doesn't mean that they happen to make some good books that really explain, especially since they're from the area, and then really have a feel for what was going on and everything. So anyway, so hopefully the book will gain a popularity at some point, end up on like Amazon and so forth. So so anyway, talk to you later.